speaking of PLSQL, as you might.
Let's.
And what's the best way to get up to speed in using that language?
Yeah, it's interesting. For me, it's been a long time since I was a beginner in PLSQL. And even the books I write and the material I do don't really focus on bringing new people into PLSQL. And I sort of felt like that's not the most important thing. Recently, I went out on Google and did a search on PLSQL. And 3 of the top 10 hits were tutorial sites for PLSQL. And not Oracle sites, which is okay. But so what it drove home to me was, wow, there are a lot of people who are trying to understand the basics of PLSQL and how to get started. So number one, we will be producing from Oracle, we will be producing newer, better materials to help people get started, and they'll be video-based multimedia, not Word documents and PowerPoints. We understand that not everybody's 55 and content to just write Word and read Word documents, so we're going to be upgrading our materials greatly. There are a lot of great resources out there, so I'll just point to some things that I've been focusing on that I think can help. Number one, the PLSQL Challenge, so plsqlchallenge.com. You can take weekly quizzes. There are a library of over 1,000 PLSQL quizzes that you can go back and take as practice, as study forms. And I can't think of anything better as a way to really dive in and actively engage your knowledge. And of course, many books, many websites, I'll put all that aside. And I'll just say that the best way to learn PLSQL is to start doing it. Now, you could say, well, I don't have a job with Oracle customers yet. I don't have a way to do that. You go to apex.oracle.com. You get a workspace to give you access to Application Express, which actually allows you to build websites with PLSQL and SQL, and you are then able to write PLSQL. You can create tables, you can write little pieces of code against it. So what I would say is pick something you want to do. Pick a nonprofit organization that you really care about a lot, an issue you care about a lot, and just think to yourself, if I was going to build a website for that group, what would it do, how would it look? And just get going and dive in. One of my mottos these days is act now, perfect later. And I say that partly because I don't like to perfect things. It takes too much time, and I'd rather not pay that much attention to details. But there's a real value to just diving in and doing things. And then, honing it as you go along. It's pretty much the model that we live in with the internet, right? We'll throw out beta software. We won't call it beta, but it'll be beta, and you'll be okay with that.
Sounds very
agile. Because we can fix it that's very agile, right? I love agile. So that's it. I would say you just have to start writing code. There's no substitute for writing code if you want to learn a language. Now, the good news about PLSQL is that it's pretty much dead simple, and I'm very lucky this way. As I said before, I'm not a computer scientist. I think I'm smart enough, but my main skill, I think, is in communication and talking about how to present this technology in an understandable way, partly because I'm not real sophisticated. So I have to understand it in a relatively simple, direct, step-by-step way, and I express it that way. So it's not hard to learn PLSQL. I think it's much harder to learn SQL, especially the big ticket features that Oracle has added in over the years. So I think it will take some effort on your part to really internalize set-oriented thinking and how to leverage that, and we need to do better with those training resources. But you're not going to find problems. The barrier to entry for PLSQL is really low. And I think that's partly why it's dismissed by a lot of other developer communities. Procedural, simple stuff. It's very readable, so it's not obscure. And I think some people don't like that because they want it to be kind of quirky and squiggly and this and that. It's like, if this is true, then do that. You can just read PLSQL if you write it right. Sure. And I think that's a positive, not a negative. So I try to do something in SQL, and if I can get it done, I use it. But then if I can't, I think to myself, either I send an email to a friend who is much better, and he helps me out, or I fall back into PLSQL. But remember, the main thing is you're getting the job done.
Right.
I think that programmers must be among the most pragmatic workers in the world. There's this whole movement of pragmatic programming. So you can codify it and give it a theology and write books about it. But the bottom line is that when we hit an obstacle, we just keep on going, whatever it takes to get the job done.
Exactly.
And that's great. That's number one, why software has revolutionized human society, for good or for bad. And it's why programming remains one of the top jobs in our society, because we do get the job done.
Sometimes buggily.
Always buggily, but sufficiently non-buggily to still be successful.
So what would be the top features of PLSQL so when somebody is learning, what are the top features that you think they should pay attention to?
Well, I think if we want to talk about key features of PLSQL, first of all, it's not when you're first learning. When you're first learning, you're going to learn the basics, and it's standard programming stuff, if, case statements, loops, etc. So you get your head around all that. But I would say when you're talking about the core task of PLSQL, which is to manipulate the Oracle database through the SQL language, certainly the most important feature I would be aware of from the standpoint of performance, because that's what it's all about really for database applications after correctness, is bulk processing. So you can do things on a row-by-row basis, basically from PL/SQL to the database on a row-by-row basis, which you can do in Java too. Java can go row by row. In fact, it's one of the only ways you can do it. But in PLSQL, you have the ability to do array or bulk processing with the for-all statement and bulk collect. So I would say that when you move past the basics, so you've got the basic ability to write code and you're writing SQL statements, watch out for writing a loop, like a cursor for loop, that contains DML inside it. If you have a loop with an insert, an update, or a delete inside of it, you're writing really slow code. Now, it'll run faster in PL/SQL than anywhere else, but it's still relatively slow. And so Oracle has some great features, and these are great features introduced 10 years ago that make it much, much faster, order of magnitude faster, to interact and update the database. So bulk processing is definitely number one. And then I think I would go right to maintainability. So I think one of the biggest issues software developers have is writing code that not only works today, but works a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that when I leave the job, somebody else can come in and take over my code and not have a nervous breakdown. So I like to really emphasize that you should write code so that when somebody else looks at your code later, they say, oh, I understand this. I feel comfortable in it. I can modify it without feeling like I'm going to destroy the world. And that to me is probably the most important thing, writing maintainable code. And the problem there fundamentally is management. I mean, most of the problems in life are management problems, really. So managers, if you think about individual programmers, our jobs are to immediately respond to user requirements, build the app for today. A manager represents the company, and therefore they should be looking out for protecting the assets and the value of the assets going forward. So to me, a good IT manager, and you walk it all the way up the chain, should be thinking not so much about meeting the deadline today, but how to make sure that a week from now or a year from now, we can go back into that same piece of code and update it and keep it in sync with user requirements without having a very expensive maintenance job on our hands. So there are lots and lots of different features in PL/SQL to make it readable, to make it maintainable. And the way I like to think about it is that you should write code that tells its own story. I like to say that I hate comments. I hate writing comments. So my code is completely self-documenting. It has no comments in it. It's probably not completely self-documenting, but it's amazing what you can do in PLSQL to make it literally be something you can read if you know English. And I'll just mention one feature there, and it's called nested subprograms. So you can write a procedure which has a declaration section. You declare variables and cursors and types. But you can also declare other procedures within a procedure, other functions within a procedure, and so on. They're called nested subprograms. And the main technique that I use to make my code readable is that in my main executable section between begin and end, I never let it go more than 20, 30, 50 lines long. So I can always at a glance look at the entire flow of the logic at that level of detail. Of course, you can't write an entire application in 50 lines of code unless it's awk or gred or sep or set or something like that.
Oh, I love sep.
Yeah. So what you're doing is simply moving the code out. You're taking 20, 30, 100 lines of code of detailed logic, and you're asking yourself, what does that code do? And if you can give it a name, if you can say, this code initializes my variables, right at the top of my executable section, you take out that code, you give it the name initialize, and you put it into a local procedure. You just move it. And in fact, SQL Developer, Toad, and other tools will automate this process for you. It's really nice. It's called refactoring external procedure, I think. So you can just, and this technique of keeping executable sections small is not only powerful for writing the code the first time, essentially using top-down design, but you can go into an existing piece of spaghetti code, which a lot of us have to do, and you can just start read it from the top and say 10, 20 lines, and then you say to yourself, oh yeah, I just got the data for the customer. Take out those 50 lines of code, say get data from customer, move it up to your declaration section, and the key thing there is then your code gets smaller, it starts telling its own story, and then if you need to sort out the issue within getting the customer, you go to that piece of code. So this one technique, keeping your executable section small, using nested subprograms to modularize and organize your code and give it names, hide details behind names, I think is the most fundamental technique for readability. And you do that one thing, and overnight, the quality of your code will climb dramatically. The number of bugs that go into your code will sink dramatically just from that one technique. Promise.
Another advantage of that is if you're going to do unit testing, it makes doing unit testing on those specific pieces easy.
So that's a good point, but not actually. So when you create a nested subprogram, it's inside the scope of the bigger one. You can't directly test a nested subprogram. To test a program, it has to be visible outside of the package, outside of the procedure. So generally speaking, you need to identify the chunks of code that should be unit tested individually. They have to be moved up to a higher scope. They have to be essentially exposed in the package specification. But you're right. I mean, stepping back from the nested subprogram, modularizing your code, creating lots of small programs, building an API, an application programmatic interface that gives names to the different tasks that you need to do. That's key to being able to test your code effectively. I mean, part of the reason, going back to that, part of the reason that people struggle so much with unit testing or testing is that the way they write their programs make them virtually untestable. If you have one procedure that takes 25 parameters and sends back 67 parameters and modifies 15 tables, oh, what a nightmare. If you break that up into 25 different programs and you can test each one, and this one does one thing and that one does another thing, then you're moving towards the point where it's possible to actually test your code.
That's important stuff. It really is. So, do you think PL/SQL is enough to get you by?
It's interesting, actually, on the PL/SQL Challenge this month, which is June 2014, we're having a discussion about what else do I need besides PLSQL? Is that enough to get through a career? And I'd say the answer right now is that certainly if you're coming out new from college and going into programming, I'd certainly encourage you to learn PL/SQL, but you can't get by just with PLSQL. I certainly got very lucky. I haven't really learned anything new besides PLSQL and a little bit of SQL since 1994. I'm sorry, it's kind of sad, but it's true. Anyway, narrow specialization worked for me, and it certainly works for a number of people already established in the Oracle ecosystem. Going forward, the chance of that happening is very slim. And even today, I'd say any PL/SQL developer should at least learn enough Java to write small classes, to read Java without being freaked out by the squiggles and this, that, and the others.
I'd suggest Groovy, but that's just me.
But Groovy's not in the database. No, I'm saying Java because you're writing PL/SQL code, and you might hit an obstacle, and you can't do it in PLSQL. PLSQL is a special purpose language. It's not designed to do everything. But because Java's in the database, you can write a very simple class in Java to expose some fundamental classes, and then from your PL/SQL code, write a very trivial amount of PL/SQL to call the Java class method. So that's why you need to know some Java to get the job done. If you hit the wall in PL/SQL, just shift over to Java, and you've got the solution in the database. In terms of outside the database, I'm the wrong guy to talk to. Groovy, go Groovy. I just heard about Julia, a new language coming out of MIT, Node.js, whatever. We just need to get the job done. But yes, certainly I think as an Oracle developer today, you've got to learn multiple technologies. You don't have to be an expert in every one of them, but you need to have a set of tools at your disposal, for sure.
A big toolbox.
But before all of that, you need to learn SQL. So I'd say, and this is advice to me too, because I don't know SQL well enough, you need to go back over the last couple of releases of Oracle and make sure that you're learning about things like analytic functions and the new great powerful stuff that make SQL so much more powerful. So ODTUG is the Oracle Developer Tools User Group. It's been around for a long time. In fact, I've been going to ODTUG conferences for as long as we've had them. I actually started going to the ECO conferences, East Coast Oracle, back in New York City. And in fact, there was one in Florida before it became ODTUG, which I was carrying around these enormous binders, which is the draft of my first edition of my first book. That was pretty cool. Anyway, so ODTUG has always had a very strong focus on supporting the needs of the developers who write the code that enable people to use Oracle technology. And they've broadened out significantly in the last several years to incorporate not just the core Oracle database technologies and PLSQL and SQL and so on, but the new acquisitions of Hyperion and Essbase and the business intelligence related technologies. So that's the focus, is to complement the application side, to complement the core database administration side with the focus on those people who are leveraging that technology to build applications. And I think ODTUG is really critical to Oracle Corporation itself, and Oracle has a very tight relationship with ODTUG and supports it a lot and sends a lot of people to it because ODTUG is focused on directly servicing the needs of developers and giving them an opportunity to share their stories. So one of the big shifts I see happening in community right now around Oracle is that we have to stop just looking at Stephen Feuerstein or Tom Kite for the wisdom. How do I do this? How do I do that? We'll do that for you. But there are literally thousands of other people around the world who are as good as I am. I know this. I accept this. I have no problem with this. Easily as good as I am and better in many ways with PLSQL because of their specific experiences. And we need to provide a way to bring them out and showcase them and have them share their knowledge. ODTUG has always done that, and I'm looking forward to doing the same things at Oracle. So Oracle is about to embark on a pretty major change and revamping of a lot of its content, a lot of its websites, the way that we communicate with our users. And fundamentally, it's going to be a shift to the new media, using video, using podcasts, using audio to get the message across. We're going to be utilizing more and more active learning techniques. For example, the PLSQL challenge and quizzes and things like that, so that people are not just reading, passively accepting knowledge, but testing their knowledge and then giving them more and more ways to share that knowledge among the entire user community. So we should be seeing a lot of change coming in the next few years.
We're ready for next year. Who's going to meet with me? All right.
Announcing K-Scope 2015 in Florida.
And to give you one example of how we're planning on doing things differently at Oracle, I will be launching a 6-month webcast series, one webcast a month. The first 3 will focus on best practices, how to write maintainable, readable code, and those will be sponsored by Oracle Learning Library. So look for those webcasts. ODTUG will let you know about all 6 of them. Check out their website, check out the YouTube channel, and make sure to join us and learn more and more about PLSQL.